All right, why don't you guys go ahead and grab your seats? I know everybody's gearing up for Thanksgiving. It's a great, probably one of my favorite holidays just because it's so centered around food. Um, but my name is Matt Olszewski. I'm one of the pastors here at H2O Toledo. So glad to see all of you. I'm going to run through some quick announcements here before I get into the message for this morning. So with Thanksgiving coming up, we want to be able to tell you about a few things, and we've been talking about this the past few weeks, a few things that are going to be happening in March and then this summer. And the reason we want to bring them up now is because we want you to have a chance to go home over Thanksgiving break and winter break to talk to your families about these different opportunities. So in March, we have spring break. You guys all have class off. And we don't have all the details figured out, but we are going to be heading south somewhere to do some sort of service project, whether that's rebuilding a roof in Memphis, Tennessee, or helping with hurricane disaster relief in the Carolinas, in Florida. We are going to be doing something like that, and it's a great time. You don't need any working experience. You don't know how to make a roof. You are going to be shown how to do all that stuff and how to clean stuff up. And so we want to take as many students as possible to go and be a part of a service project over spring break. And then also this summer, we have a summer program called Leadership Training. It takes place in Estes Park, Colorado. It is one of the most amazing summers you can experience, learning about God, connecting with other college students just like you from other campuses across the country that are taking part in the leadership training program. And so after service, we're going to have a interest meeting. If you just want to know anything about either of these opportunities, we're going to meet in the hallway after church, and we can get you some info, dates, cost, and answer any questions that you may have. So we'd love to have you for that. Next Sunday is our monthly Simple Sunday. So if you've never been a part of one of our Simple Sundays, you will walk into this room and it'll look dramatically different. We won't have any of this stuff set up. It'll just be chairs. And so we have once a month this thing called Simple Sunday, and we'll explain next week when you get here why we do that. But we also share a meal afterwards. And with it being Thanksgiving coming up, it's going to be Thanksgiving themed. And so shortly, here maybe in the next day or so, we are going to get out a spreadsheet where you can sign up to bring something. And this is where we try to get as many people in the church involved. And so if you are a student, I know that you don't have access to kitchens. It's hard for you to think about, what can I contribute? When I was a college student and we did something similar, I was the guy that brought cans of corn. And we warmed them up in the microwave. We don't have a microwave here, but I was the corn guy. I just brought corn. That's what I could contribute. I could give about 85 cents of my own money to buy 2 cans of corn, because I went to college a long time ago and cans of corn were cheaper. But that's what I brought. And so we would love for you students to figure out, what could I bring? What is something that I could contribute to help with this meal? So that's going to be next week. And then this upcoming Friday, every year, we do this thing called Operation Christmas Child. Churches all around the world take part in Operation Christmas Child. This is an opportunity for us as students, as people of this church, to give a little money, go shopping at a store, and buy a bunch of things that will fill a shoebox. And those things will be sent all around the world to kids all over the world for them to not only experience Christmas, but experience the love of Jesus from people that they've never met. And so on Friday, we are going to take part in this. All the details are up there, where to meet and how we will do that. And so we'd love for as many of you to come out to that and help us celebrate Christmas and serve and bless kids all over the world. Okay, those are all the announcements. Okay. I got a question for you guys. maybe some of you watch this, but who here watched the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight on Friday night? Okay? How disappointed were you that you stayed up so late, or I was disappointed that I stayed up so late to watch that fight? Yeah, it was very, very disappointing. I have lots of things that I could say, but that's not why we're here, okay? What I'm more interested in is that a video surfaced, I think, the day of the fight, or maybe even the day before, where a 12-year-old girl, I think maybe she's a TikToker, but she's a 12-year-old girl that interviewed Mike Tyson, and she asked him the question of, hey, when this is all said and done, when your life is over, what would you like your legacy to be? And Mike Tyson answered, I don't really believe in legacy. I think it's all about your ego. I think legacy, nobody's going to care that Mike Tyson lived. Nobody should care that I did or accomplished certain things in my life. Why would anybody care that I was the greatest boxer, or maybe possibly the greatest boxer of all time? Why would anybody care about that? And this girl was kind of like taken aback from it. She's like, oh, I've never heard anybody answer that question that way before. And it's interesting on the timing, because we planned this series like a year ago. And to finish this series on talking about the legacy of Joseph, because we've been talking about the life of Joseph over these past few weeks. And the timing of this fight and the timing of that interview that we're going to be talking about, legacy. And here's what Mike Tyson got right about legacy. What he did get right about legacy is that the way that we typically define and we think about legacy in our modern culture is we typically think about it in that it does point to our ego, who we are, what we do. Our legacy is solely dependent on who we are and what we accomplish. And even though Tyson didn't directly say this, he was basically saying legacy means nothing if it's all about you. So I think Mike Tyson was onto something there. Because let's be honest here for a second. We, and you probably didn't expect to hear this morning at church, we are not that special. You are not that special. I'm not that special. By ourselves, what we do in this world, in the time that we have while we live on this earth, it's really insignificant. Like when we boil it down, who we are, what we can accomplish, it's so small and puny. So small. But here's where Tyson gets it wrong, is that legacy absolutely matters. Legacy absolutely matters, because when we expand our definition of legacy and we move it beyond just who we are, there's something bigger and better to our lives. Because if legacy, again, if it all points back to us, our legacy is nothing but a life of ego. How do I fill what I accomplished? How do I build a resume that people will be impressed by? So this morning, I want to spend our time expanding our definition of what legacy is as we close out this series about Joseph. So if you have a Sunday handout, you can pull that out in your first fill-in. If I can define legacy in a couple different ways, the first way that I would define legacy is about us, but also about our partnership with God. Legacy is about us, but also about our partnership with God. And we've seen this throughout the series that we've been doing about Joseph, right? Joseph, as a young man at 17 years old, was sold into slavery by his own brothers who hated him. And so Joseph, sold into slavery, he ends up in Egypt, far, far away from home. He's given some responsibility in a leader in Egypt's country named Potiphar. And Potiphar's wife is hot for Joseph. She's like, I want this man. He's really, really handsome, and I want him to sleep with me. And Joseph shows integrity. He shows integrity. He wants to honor God, and he wants to honor Potiphar, and he says no over and over again. And what does he get for that? Potiphar's wife accuses him of taking advantage of her, and he gets thrown in jail. He gets thrown in jail. Well, he gets out of jail, and then he's put in charge of Egypt. He's second in command to Pharaoh. And he's put in charge of basically saving the world at that time from everybody dying from a famine. Because there was going to be 7 years of abundance of food, that Joseph was in charge of gathering all that food, putting it in places where he could keep that for when everything went dry and food ran out. He would be able to feed the people. So he was dependable. And so we saw this legacy of being faithful and dependable. And then finally, when his brothers, his own family that hated him and sold him into slavery, when they were starving and they were looking for food, they traveled all the way to Egypt, not knowing that Joseph was still alive. They come before him. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them, and they are begging for food. And Joseph spares their life, and he provides them everything that they need. And then eventually he reveals himself to his brothers, and he forgives them. The same brothers that wanted him to die and hoping that they would never see him ever again. So we see how Joseph, time after time, partnered with God, knowing what he was up to, knowing what he was trying to accomplish. And we saw this legacy being built. And actually, after almost 2,000 years later that Joseph lived, people were still writing about his legacy and his partnership with God. In Hebrews chapter 11, this was written thousands of years after Joseph lived. Hebrews chapter 11 is called the Hall of Faith. And it's just over and over again, these people that lived a long time ago, that the writer of Hebrews was commending and saying they lived by faith, and this is what God did through them. And it's a huge long list, and Joseph is in that list. And this is what it says in Hebrews 11, verse 22. It says, it was by faith, which is just another way of saying when partnered with God. When partnered with God, Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. So Hebrews 11 points to the fact that legacy is important. When it's partnered with God, legacy is important. And what I just read, that might not make complete sense to you right now, but I'm going to explain what this looks like, and we're going to pick up the story where Joseph explains all of this. So in Genesis 50, this is the last chapter in the very first book of the Bible. It says this, then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. Meaning, he's just telling his brothers, my partnership with God here on earth is coming to an end. My part in moving God's story forward is almost over. And with that, Joseph, what he says next, he's basically saying, but your partnership with God is just starting, because he says this, but God will surely come to your aid. Your partnership with God is just starting. He's going to come to your aid, and he's going to take you up out of this land, meaning Egypt, which was just mentioned in Hebrews. He's going to take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So what Joseph says here, this is a callback to something that was actually said much earlier in the book of Genesis, something that happened way earlier with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm going to explain that here in a minute. But the story continues in Genesis 50. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So Joseph, at the end of his life, he's solidifying his partnership with God. He's saying, I've done my part in the plan that God has set in motion long before me. It was passed down from my father Jacob, who had passed it down from his father, which is Joseph's grandfather, Isaac, who had passed it down from his father, Joseph's great-grandfather, Abraham. So 3 generations before Joseph, God made a covenant with Abraham that Joseph was still holding together. So covenant, you guys know this, but I feel like we just need to define certain words. Covenant, it's a binding agreement between 2 separate parties to work together toward a common goal. That's what a covenant is. So God established a covenant between Abraham and himself. And we're going to see that in Genesis 15. And so this is what Joseph is talking about in Genesis 50. And this is what the Hebrew authors commended Joseph for, that this whole life of honoring God, being dependable to save the lives of millions of people from famine, and being a person that forgives his brothers for the things that they've done to him, this was all based on a covenant that was given 3 generations before him. So along with the dreams that we talked about that Joseph had, that he had confidence in what God was doing, he had this covenant that he was holding on to that had been passed down from generation to generation, because he wanted to see this covenant lived out. Because again, he was partnered with God. That was his legacy. He was partnered and trusted God. So let me just give you a brief summary about what this covenant was that Abraham had with God. So God promised Abraham that his family would grow to as many people as there were stars in the sky. That if he looked up into the sky and he saw the stars, God said, I'm going to give you more people in your family than what you can see in the sky. God also promised Abraham that he would give this growing family a place to live. He promised this beautiful place to live. Not just any place, it was a huge place, a place where they could continue to grow. It was a place where farmland would have been amazing, and anything that they ever wanted to grow would grow there. A land where everything would be in abundance. They would have everything that they needed. This is the covenant that God made with Abraham. And here's how God made this covenant with Abraham. And this is how 2 people, not just between Abraham and God, but this is how 2 people would get into a covenant at this time. This is how they would bring upon a partnership together, whether that was a business partnership, that was a partnership deal for cattle or possessions. This was a covenant ritual that 2 people would go through. Both people entering into a covenant together, they would both bring to the table a 3-year-old heifer, a cow or a bull. They would bring a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And they would cut these larger animals in half. Remember, this is thousands of years ago, okay? We don't do sacrifices like this anymore. Thousands of years ago, they would cut these animals in half, and they would place them on each side, creating like a pathway, a lane. And then they would put the birds on each side as well. They wouldn't cut the birds. So they would walk through together, through these sacrificed animals, symbolizing that we have made a commitment to one another. We are entering into this partnership together. This is our down payment to each other. We have sacrificed these animals that we owned. We have killed them to let each other know that this covenant should not be taken lightly. Because if either of us breaks this covenant, if we walk down this aisle together and we break this covenant, just like these animals that were cut in two, we will die. If either one of us breaks this covenant, we will be slaughtered and die just like these animals that we walk through. So when you entered a covenant, you were putting your life on the line. This was a very serious thing that you were doing. But this is not how the ritual went with God and Abraham. This is how it goes. Abraham laid out the animals just like he was supposed to, but then this happened. It says, as the sun was going down, Abram, his name was later changed to Abraham, Abraham fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. So this is in Egypt. God is talking about this is in Egypt, where Joseph is about to die. And that 400 years will actually start shortly after Joseph dies. So after 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land. Okay, so you see what's happening here. God is laying out this covenant to Abraham in a dream. He's saying, your descendants will be many. That's a good thing. They will be enslaved. Not good at all. But they will get the land that I promised you. Your people will get the land, your family. But then this happened, which is not how a covenant ritual ceremony was supposed to go. Abraham is still sleeping, and it continues. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch, which this represents God himself, pass between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River. So here's what's strange about this covenant. Only one person in the covenant walked through the sacrificed animals, and it wasn't Abraham. Only God walked through these animals. And here's what that means. God is saying, my faithfulness to you in this covenant will not be dependent upon you. You have nothing to do with how this covenant and these promises are going to be upheld. You are going to be a part of the covenant, but I am not going to depend on you because you will mess this up. And if you walk through, if I allow you to walk through these animals with me, you'll have to die because that's the penalty for making a covenant that you can't keep. You have to die. So in my mercy, God is saying, in my mercy and in my love for you and in how I am going to make this plan work, I am not going to allow you to walk through these animals with me. I will take on the whole burden and responsibility of all of this. I will put it all on me. I am the only one who must remain faithful in this covenant. The decisions that you make will have consequences. When your family ends up in slavery in Egypt for 400 years, that's going to be due to some of the consequences that you're going to have to deal with because of the decisions that your family makes, but it won't take away that my plan is still going to work. That's what God is saying in this, right? And so God gives Abraham this covenant. And because thousands of years after Abraham was given this covenant, Jesus, who is God himself, came to earth to give a very similar covenant to you and I. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm going to come back to that. I want to hold off for now. But here is another strange thing that I want you to notice about legacy in partnership with God. Abraham doesn't get to see this covenant come true. Neither does his son Isaac. Neither does Jacob. And neither does Joseph. And I mean literally not a single part of this covenant had been established in any of their lifetimes. The only part that had been started is that their family was getting bigger. Okay? The Israelite family was growing, but that's it. It almost seems like there was no hope at all. They had very little real-time evidence that God was doing his end of the bargain. But these men trusted God with what he promised for the future. And so here's a second way that I would define legacy that I feel like we can take with us. Legacy is a partnership with what God could do or will do that you may never get to see happen. And let's be honest, again, we hate this, right? What do you mean I have to partner with God? What do you mean I have to do a bunch of hard work? I have to put myself out there and trust God in scary circumstances. I have to put myself out there and do things that make me uncomfortable. I have to put myself out there and do things that I'm not sure what the result is going to be. And I don't even get to see the results sometimes. Why would we sign up for that? That seems like something that we would not want to sign up for. Well, if you're here this morning and you would call yourself a Christian, if you would say that I'm a follower of Jesus, whether you know it or not, you have already signed up for that. Whether you know it or not, you have already signed up for that. And here's why. I mentioned earlier that Jesus made a similar covenant with us that was made with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So just as God walked by himself through those sacrificed animals so that Abraham would not be killed by abandoning the covenant, because Abraham and myself, you and Abraham, we're all the same. We will break the covenant. We will go back on our promises. We will not uphold our end of the bargain. That's just who we are as humans. We're beautifully made in God's image, but we forget it all the time. And we do what we want to do. So just as God walked through by himself, Jesus himself, the sacrifice, so that we could experience life through his covenant and not death, Jesus became the sacrifice so the whole world could receive this covenant promise of forgiveness if they chose to know him, if they chose to trust God like Abraham did, like Isaac did, like Jacob did, in the whole series that we just went through, like Joseph did. Jesus' life was put to death. His covenant. Jesus' life was put to death so that we could have life here on earth and forever when our physical bodies die. And if you believe this, you've committed to this, just like Joseph did. You have committed to seeing God's loving covenant be known and experienced by the rest of the world. That's what Joseph committed to. When he gave up his ability to take on Potiphar's wife, when he gave up his probably right to destroy his family and murder his brothers because they sold him into slavery. He gave it all up because he knew that there was a loving God that had sacrificed, that had a vision for the future of what could be and would be. And we have the same through Jesus. We have the same through Jesus. And the best way that we can accomplish this vision, the best way that we can bring ourselves in part of this vision is to imitate what Jesus did, who he was. And I want to just walk you through a quick example here. In the book of Matthew, it says, Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. There's always been two kingdoms, the kingdom of the world and God's kingdom. One brings good news, one brings bad news. One has a set of standards that brings chaos and greed and destruction, and the other brings peace, sacrifice, forgiveness. God's kingdom is good news for everyone. The kingdom of the world is only good for those who end up on top. So we have these two kingdoms, and Jesus right here is saying, I am bringing and establishing a kingdom here on earth that is good, and it's good for everybody. And I want you to help me. I want you to partner with me to bringing this good news to the world. And it continues. Jesus healed every kind of disease and illness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Listen, we go throughout every single day, and we can feel like what Jesus just described. We can feel as though we're confused. We need help. We need guidance. We need someone to kind of push us along the way. We need a shepherd to say, nope, not that way, go this way. And that's who Jesus is in our lives when we trust him, when we're followers of Jesus. But we also are smart enough to know that we look around this campus, we walk around just in day-to-day situations, and we notice that people look tired. They look worn out. They look exhausted. They look angry. They look like they're ready to get revenge on people that have hurt them. And they need guidance. They need a sheep. They need a shepherd. Because they're wandering and they don't know what direction they're going. And that's where we come in. We get to walk with people. We get to talk with people, and we're not going to know the right things to say, and we're not always going to do the right things, but Jesus is calling us and inviting us in to live in the ways of his kingdom. And then here's the last thing that Jesus says. He said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his fields. Here's what I think Jesus is inviting us into, asking us into, is that we could be builders of legacy. Builders of God's kingdom legacy, not our legacy. We play a part, we have a role, but we are partnered with him side by side, and everything points to him. Sure, we're going to get credit from here and there, but we have an opportunity to walk and partner with God to bring his kingdom, right? If you grew up in a more traditional church and you said the Lord's Prayer, that is the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what Jesus is asking us to pray, that we would bring his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. I'm confident. I am so confident that every single one of you, whether you're a student here this morning or you're not a student, you're someone just visiting, please hear me on this. You are here for a reason. You have purpose. You have direction. And there are so many little things that play into all of that, right? But it's so much bigger than those small things. Your life is so much bigger than the degree you're going to get. Is it important? Yes. Your life is so much bigger than the relationships you're going to have. For those of you that are going to get married someday, your life is so much bigger than the person that you're going to get married to. Your life is so much bigger than the hobbies you have, the interests you have. It's so much bigger than that. God has called you, and He's going to use those things to help you and bring you to people that need to experience God's kingdom. So all of those things are important. But these things point to how you can build God's kingdom legacy. Here's how I've seen it kind of play out in my life. And I'll back up even before I entered this picture. But a couple weeks ago, some of our staff, we came from Bowling Green to start this church at Toledo. And so our roots are at BGSU, the enemy school, okay? Don't hate us for that. But I became a part of H2O Bowling Green in 1998 when I was a freshman. It was a long time ago, okay? But the church there was started in 1984. And so a couple weeks ago, we went back to BG to celebrate 40 years of the church existing on BG's campus. And the way that it got started was two couples moved to Bowling Green to start a church. They were in their 20s, mid-20s. And they talked at the celebration. And they admitted, we had no idea what we were doing. All we knew was that God had called us to be a part of building a legacy where people would know and understand and believe the love that they can have through Jesus and the purpose that they can have through Jesus. And what's amazing is that I walked on campus 14 years later, and I became a part of that legacy that they never got to see. They've never met me. We've been in the same room a couple weeks ago, but they don't know who I am. But I'm part of a legacy that continues to build because two couples walked on that campus to start a church. And because I walked into this church as a freshman who had just become a Christian, because I didn't grow up going to church, I started learning things about this vision that God had for me. This is where I started dating my wife, Gretchen. And I knew and understood that my dating her had to look different than any relationship that I had had before that. Because if we could just simply put it, any relationship that I had before that was not healthy, it was not beneficial to me or the other person that I was dating. Not great relationships. And I knew that because we both knew God and we wanted the same things, I knew it had to be different. It had to look different, had to sound different. We had to interact with each other different. Because I knew I wasn't just looking for a dating relationship to be different then. I was looking towards, I'm going to have kids someday, and I'm going to have to tell them how dating works. I'm going to have to show them how marriage works. I'm going to have to talk about things that hopefully are going to be helpful for them because they've seen God's kingdom legacy in me and my wife. And most certainly being a pastor. I don't have to be a pastor to take part in God's kingdom legacy. But when I interact with students on this campus, when I meet people that don't go to church, that wouldn't say that they're Christians, how I talk to them, the things that I talk to them about, the way that I treat them, the way that I care for them and love them. And I don't get it right every single time, and neither will you. But it's all pointing to, I hope that they have a future of knowing who God is. Will I ever get to see the result of that? Probably not. Will my one interaction make a difference? Maybe. I hope it does. I pray it does. But everything points. Everything is heading in a direction of this huge celebration and this huge victory that we may never get to see in somebody's life. But that's part of being a part of God's kingdom legacy. And so just like Jesus said at the end, that the harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few. This is my prayer, and this is my question. Would you be a builder of God's kingdom legacy? Would you say, God has given me a purpose? God has loved me in such a way that he sent his son Jesus to die for me so that I would not have to die spiritually, so that I can live life with hope. You're needed. You're very much needed. There's a spot for you, right? Sometimes we look around and we think, am I needed? Is there a spot for me? There's a spot for every single one of you. Will you experience life differently from here on out when you commit to building God's kingdom legacy? Absolutely. It'll be hard, but it'll be worth it. Because you're doing it with so many other people. You're not alone. That's why God created the church. He brought us all together so that we can do this together. We're not just sending everybody out as individuals and hoping they survive, because we all know we don't survive alone. It's not good to be alone. God gave us each other. So when Jesus asked, or even asked me to pray that we would have more laborers, that's what I want to pray. I want to pray for all of you, that we would see and know and experience God in such a way that we become part of his kingdom legacy. So let me pray. God, thank you that you look beyond the here and now. You look to so far in the future of what your plan is. You look so far into places that we will never see, people that we will never see, but the ripple effect of the legacy that we are partnering with you on, the ripple effect is so powerful. When we trust you and we partner with you here, it makes an impact in places that we'll never see. God, I pray that we would trust you. I pray that we would have the vision to know that we're part of a greater story. That the things that we accomplish in this world, the jobs that we get, the grades that we get, the success that we have, amazing. We want those things, but God, there's something more for us, and that's you. God, I pray that our legacy would build and grow. And God, that we would walk as Joseph did, as his father Jacob did, as Isaac and Abraham, and most certainly Jesus. We love you, God. Give us strength. Give us grace. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.